we've all had a reset button recently. That amazing alignment of the sun and the moon is an opportunity to try some new stuff. And I'm not going to pre-shadow the new stuff except for to say that we're going to plant some seeds of hope this morning, literally. I really want to capture the actual words that are being used by the global community. So the words I'm going to read are words from the people who have created what is now adopted by the United Nations. There was one little article in the New York Times, one little article in Washington Post. You can Google it in the international media, there's a lot more coverage. A new treaty that will eventually, over time, eliminate nuclear weapons from our planet. This has happened in our lifetime. And the purpose of my event with you today is to help you to adopt this as part of the outcome of your lives. This is not separate from every single thing you've ever done to help bring forward the idea that we could have a future together that is not apocalypse how. So that's why I wanted to do this program. So here again, I'm going to just, for the first few slides, read. United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading toward their total elimination. This was 3 convened sessions at the United Nations, and some of my slides are going to be from the last session. A treaty language was agreed upon on July 7th and adopted by 122 nations. And it will go to the General Assembly next month, and nations will begin to be able to sign this treaty like any other global treaty. So where did it come from? Every single effort that anybody ever made, every person, every organization, every nation that has ever worked for peace must claim this. We must all claim it together. The leaders were from nations that do not have and do not want nuclear weapons. So I'm just going to do this history briefly. In 2010, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the military treaty on nuclear weapons, under military law, adopted a small provision that said that they should look at the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. And many of us in the United States are, excuse me, but I include myself in this term, very arrogant. We heard the word humanitarian and categorically said there are no humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. They're devastating, catastrophic, eliminate everything, can't use that word there. But it was the International Red Cross who said, if anyone drops one bomb, we're the ones who are going to have to go in, like we did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let's talk about this. And so the humanitarian impacts was put into the NPT, and it was put under the General Assembly to take on this work. And the General Assembly doesn't have any vetoes like the Security Council. It's a democratic body that rocks on votes. So they had a vote in 2016. That's the outcome of the conferences I'm about to talk about. But they voted to do a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, that instrument would establish general prohibitions and obligations, as well as a political commitment to achieve and maintain a nuclear weapon-free world. It was, I think, over 130 countries that voted last November, almost a year ago, to move ahead to write the language that would do that. They had a mandate for concrete legal measures, provisions and norms to attain and maintain a world without nuclear weapons. You can find all this on links I'm going to give you later. So they held, as a process, 3 global conferences on humanitarian impacts. In 2013, it was Oslo, Norway, the first conference. In February of 2014 was in Nayarit, Mexico. And in December 2014, the same year, in Vienna, Austria. And I received a phone call in maybe March or April, from an Austrian diplomat. I work in my home, so it was standing in my bedroom, and there's this guy on the phone saying, I want you to come talk about the medical impacts of nuclear weapons. No, that's not me. I don't work on nuclear weapons. You want international physicians for the prevention of nuclear war. Yes, I want you to come and talk about the medical impacts of nuclear weapons. And I think you can do it. No, you want PSR. I can give you names. I can give you phone numbers. I said no 4 times. Then the guy finally said, yeah, but you wrote the paper, Atomic Radiation is More Harmful to Women. And I said, yes, I did. He said, I want you to spend half your time on that paper. I said, well, how much time are you going to give me? He said, 10 minutes.
Oh my.
I said, no, I am not going to travel halfway around, or a quarter of the way around the world to talk for 10 minutes. He said, yeah, but there's going to be 1,000 people in the room, and 153 of them are going to be nation-state ambassadors, and the rest are their staff, your friends, and other experts. Some media. I said, okay, I'll come. So that's a picture of me up on the stage in the Hofburg Palace. There were, as I say, 1,000 people. It was organized by non-nuclear nations and the leadership from international NGOs and UN agencies that help people who understand how devastating nuclear weapons use would be. That's the cover of the proceedings, which is available online for no cost. So their strategy was simple. Previously, people working for peace had figured out that humanitarian law protects people's lives and our planet. Military law is about killing people and our planet. We don't want to work under military law when it comes to elimination of nuclear weapons. We want to work under humanitarian law. And the same thing had been figured out for the landmine work in the 80s and 90s. And in 1997, the Landmine Convention came into effect. It is now the most successful treaty in the history of treaties. And its hallmarks are that non-combatants are impacted, and impacted over time. People are still dying from the Second World War today because of landmines that are left in Europe, in Vietnam, Cambodia. Across the world where there have been wars, there are still landmines, and people are still dying. But now there's a comprehensive effort to find them, dig them up, detonate them, take care of them. And so the idea in the hearts and minds of these leaders on nuclear weapons was to use the Landmine Treaty as the template, as the basis. Oh, and I should tell you that that's a picture of the guy who helped to get those negotiations to happen, and a lot of it was the Nairobi summit, and that's the declaration being shared with other key leaders of that event.
What was his name?
You know, we have it, and I meant to put it here, but it's a name that is not coming readily to my mind. But if you Google the Convention on Mines, it will come right up. So what I need to tell you is that why the ambassador specifically wanted me to come to the Vienna conference was because they need to show the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons on non-combatants and through time. And while there is far greater impact from the detonations, from the fireball, from the climate impacts that wonderful people like Ira Helfand give his life to educating us about, those are actually indiscriminate, which is part of the profile of a humanitarian impact, but they're not disproportionate. Although I do think famine is disproportionate, and Ira just won't stop and look at it. But, whatever. My work shows a disproportionate impact of ionizing radiation on children and on women. And they needed that. And it turned out that my work, which I'm about to share with you, was the key that turned in the lock. Nuclear weapons had become blasé. This was before Trump was elected that all this work was going on. Now, they're not blasé at all. But in the 2010, 2011, 12 time frame, nuclear weapons, nothing new. But my work was new. It got the attention of the diplomatic community, and it got people to the table. So I actually was gifted with incredible diplomatic work being done using my findings. So what are they? We've known that radiation was more harmful to children. That is not news. The children's cells are dividing more rapidly, their bodies are smaller, the same amount of radiation gives them a larger dose. There's lots of reasons that we know that children are more impacted. This is the paper that started this whole story. I told you about it, and we're going to get there. I did not go out and collect data. I simply reanalyzed data that had been published by the National Academy of Sciences. They mention in their text in 2 places that females are more impacted by radiation, but they do not present what I'm about to present to you, which is in the numbers. And it's pretty stark. When you look at children, boys will get cancer from an acute fast dose of radiation over their lifetimes. People who are boys will get cancer. Yes, absolutely, it's harmful. But twice as many girls in the numbers from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And when something doubles in a biological setting, you have to stop and look at it. It's not a blip. This graph is probably going to occupy my work for the rest of my working life. It's the same information, only it's the entire age of all the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 along the bottom. Which I have to stop and say every time I present this data, I apologize because our country decided to use the first weapons on cities full of people. And I really wish it had never happened. But it created the only data set that we have that is all ages and both genders. This is the only place we can see this because all the worker studies are all adults and primarily male. So along the bottom is all the different ages people were in 1945 in August when those terrible things happened. And it's 60 years of data in each of those slots. And so this is a snapshot of the cancer response of our species to an acute radiation exposure. Now, these people were shielded, they survived, so it wasn't the full thing, but it's been adjusted to a single, which is about the amount of a CAT scan. Single dose, 20 millisieverts is 2 grams, what atomic workers in the United States are allowed to get in a year, or about a CAT scan. So you can see it's the same information. On the left side, the youngest children had the most cancer over their lifetime, and the pink line, which is females, is about double the male line. So this means that when we set radiation standards, we should set them to protect little girls because they are part of the human life cycle and they are the most impacted. So we'll protect everybody else better if we protect little girls. Now this is where I started. The children work came later, but this is the adult exposure ratio. When the people who were adults in 1945 in August, for every 2 men who eventually died of cancer, 3 women died. Now I need to go back because I need you to understand these aren't childhood cancers. These are over the entire lifespan. So it's women who were exposed as girls more than it's girls in terms of when the cancer arrives. The picture doesn't show the arrival of cancer. It shows the age they were at exposure and then the total cancers over lifetime. So here we come to the adults. Oops, this is being slow. 2 men, 3 women, which has changed my behavior in the field, I'll tell you that. Arnie got to go out and get the samples in Fukushima, not me. He wanted to, so, you know. So here we come to June of this year. The negotiations were going on for the language of the new treaty, and I was called to do some information sessions to continue presenting the evidence so that it wouldn't be opinion. I like nuclear weapons. I don't like nuclear weapons. We wanted to keep it based on facts. And so I brought the witnesses. This is Linda Modica from Eastern Tennessee, Roland Oldham from Tahiti, where the French Polynesian tests were done. And in Eastern Tennessee, I should have said before I went on that Linda lives near 2 nuclear facilities. Irwin, Tennessee has nuclear fuel services, and there's Aerojet in Jonesboro. That's Alfred Meyer, who is with Physicians for Social Responsibility. He was our moderator. And Karina Lester is from Australia, where the Brits put off weapons tests. And I need to say that Karina and Roland's peoples didn't suffer 1 atomic bomb Each of those locations had between 30 and 40 detonations over a period of time. And there was varying amounts of protection for people and varying amounts of, quote, cleanup afterwards, but these are really nuclear devastated areas. And there's me. And we also had a man from Nagasaki who gave testimony from the floor, and that was on the 20th of June. On the 21st of June, we did an expert panel, and that is Matthew McKinsey, who's the head of nuclear at Natural Resources Defense Council, Hans Christensen, who is the guy who knows more about nuclear arsenals than anybody else on the planet who doesn't work for a government, Dr. Arjun, he's with the American Federation of Scientists, AFS, Arjun Makajani, IEER, the new executive director of PSR, Jeff Carter. Next to him is Tillman Rudd from International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and moi. And this was in a media briefing for global media. We were in the actual press corps for the United Nations. And the very interesting thing, I won't go on, but these guys were kind of hardened Americans, again, that kind of arrogance, oh, the US will never sign, blah, blah, blah. So they were giving perfectly good presentations, but nothing about the treaty. So when the journalists started asking questions, they had to kind of come out of their shell and realize that, hey, the lower 48 is not the planet, right? And the planet was asking them questions. And I saw transformation in these individuals as we walked out the door. They were giggling. So on July 7th, there was a vote. You can't see all this, but 122 of the nations present said yes. A lot of them were not present. There was no vote at all. Netherlands said no, and Ceylon abstained. I don't know why. And I'm almost done with the slides, but this is in the preamble of the final language, and I just have to read it. I'm sorry. It's the fourth point. Cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons cannot be adequately addressed, transcend national borders, pose grave implications for human survival, the environment, socioeconomic development, the global economy, food security, and the health of current and future generations, and have a disproportionate impact on women and girls, including as a result of ionizing radiation. In the preamble of our new treaty. Now, I'm going to just unfold for you the fact that I think the rest of my work life is going to be devoted to communicating to the medical community and the research community this part of the finding. Because we need a generation of MDs and PhDs who are going to go to bat and change everything. Everything in the nuclear world can be changed if they take this seriously. Because that yellow dot up there is the outcome of cancers to people who were exposed as little girls. And we need to also acknowledge that the dot on the left on the blue line is also 5 times higher. But the 10 times higher is enough to stop the show. And this is because every single radiation regulation that exists in the world assumes that the individual getting the radiation is that male dot that's 10 times less, is the reference man. And this can and should change, and my new project is going to help with that change. And I'm making that transition in this next year. I'm very hopeful about it, and very, very hopeful about this new treaty. It will take time before we have hundreds of nations on this treaty, but we have the leadership of Austria, Sweden, Norway, Mexico. As the Western nations that we know, we have every single island nation. All of the climate leaders are on board, and the others will come. And it's all about having the ability to do what we're now going to turn to in the second part of this program, which is a very radical thing. The opposite of hope in our language is fear. And we know that our society is rolling on the second. So I invite us to imagine that if we can muster honest to goodness, authentic hope at any point in our life, that we are doing some of the most important work that lies ahead. Because this is now available. The treaty and the path is available. All we need now is the openness and the willingness to embrace it. So I'm going to stop and take any questions and discussion for a few minutes, and then we're going to engage with hope.